Chapter 121 to 123. Serecta frowned and turned to Kay. Is it true that Guinevere pulled out the sword from the stone, and Artoria wishes to honor him as her king? Kay confirmed with a nod. Yes, that's true. Serecta rose from his seat with a solemn expression and slapped the armrest. Nonsense. Kay furrowed his brow in response to Serecta's outburst and attempted to clarify the situation. Actually, he's just serving as a proxy king for now. The throne will be returned to Artoria later. Can the throne be passed around like that? And what does Merlin think about this arrangement? Kay appeared helpless and responded, Merlin was the one who suggested this proposal. Serecta's expression revealed his confusion. After a moment of silence, he asked, what does Merlin want to accomplish with this arrangement? Kay shrugged and showed a look of helplessness. What that white rat wants to accomplish? How would I know? Serecta began to pace back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back. This is going to be a problem. This is going to be a problem. If this arrangement is exposed, the kingdom will face grave trouble, he muttered anxiously, trying to ease his father's concern. Kay chimed in. Actually, it's not as big of a deal as it may seem. Merlin intends to have Guinevere use the name Arthur and keep his true identity a secret. Besides, only you and I are aware of Arthur's real identity. No one else knows. Serecta expressed his doubt. But will Guinevere agree to use the name Arthur? You know that name represents one's honor. Why would he? Before he could finish his sentence, Kay interjected. He has agreed to it, and is very willing to do so. Serecta was once again taken aback by this news. After a moment of silence, he couldn't help but ask, why would Guinevere agree to this? Kay answered honestly. He made a deal with Merlin. As someone from Avalon, Guinevere has no way to return home. Merlin promised him that if he assumed the name of Arthur and led Britain to defeat Vortigern, he would show him the way back to Avalon. Serecta raised a valid point. But Merlin has never been to Avalon. How could he possibly know how to guide Guinevere back? Kay shook his head and replied, I don't know. I'm not that white rat. His tone carried a hint of ridicule towards Merlin. Serecta frowned and continued to pace back and forth. After a moment, he looked directly at Kay and asked calmly, and what about you? What is your opinion on this matter? Kay furrowed his brow in thought and then responded with a contradictory answer. For me, it's both accepting and unacceptable, both relieved and conflicted. It's this kind of contradictory emotion, he explained. Serecta fell silent and sank back into his chair, tapping his index finger on the armrest. Tap, tap. After a heavy sigh, he muttered, what a troublesome autumn. Vortigern just gained control of Rongominiad not long ago, and now the sword in the stone has created this mess. Serecta's voice gradually grew quieter as he spoke. Kay raised an eyebrow. Huh. RHON go ... What? Serecta shook his head and dismissed Kay's inquiry. No, it's nothing. Since Merlin is behind this, he must have a plan. By the way, what is Artoria doing now? Kay replied nonchalantly, wearing a female outfit. What? Serecta was stunned. In Serecta's estate, Shirou circled around Artoria, causing her distress and shyness. Please ... Don't look at me like that. It's making me very uncomfortable. My king. Shirou came to a sudden halt, his eyes locking onto Artoria's figure. She stood before him, draped in a pristine white gown that flowed effortlessly around her lithe form. Like a lily in full bloom, she emanated an air of purity and grace. Her hands were adorned with soft white gloves, adding a touch of elegance to her already angelic presence. As Shirou gazed upon her, he couldn't help but notice the way her golden locks cascaded down her back in waves, tied up into a sweet bow with a sleek black ribbon. Artoria's delicate features were framed by a loose strand of hair, adding to her effortless beauty. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Shirou felt his heart skip a beat. As he continued to study her, he noticed the once serious expression on her face give way to a shy blush, adding a touch of warmth to her already captivating persona. Artoria exuded a radiant beauty that was akin to that of a lily in full bloom. In that moment, she could be called Artoria Lily. However, Shirou wasn't paying attention to this. Instead, his focus was on the black stockings on her slender legs, which were visible under the white dress. The fact that stockings existed in this era was novel and intriguing to him. Artie, where did you get those stockings? Shirou asked. Artoria's voice quivered. Why, you're not suggesting I take off my stockings, are you? Please don't give me such a command. I want to keep some of my masculine traits, my king. I'm already feeling very uncomfortable. Masculine traits, he repeated. Suddenly remembering that stockings were originally worn by men, he was surprised to see them being worn in this era, given that they were created in the 16th century. As expected of Nasuverse, upon seeing Artoria burying herself in shame, he quickly apologized. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to ask you to take off your stockings. No, you shouldn't apologize. I'm the one who should be apologizing, she said, feeling ashamed and embarrassed. As a knight, I should have been able to carry out the king's command, especially when it's for the sake of the knights. I'm just too incompetent as your knight. I'm still an immature apprentice. Just as Shirou was about to say something, Merlin, who was standing nearby, chuckled and said, That's right, Lily, there's still so much for you to learn as a knight. and the road ahead is long. Lily. Merlin, please don't call me that. It's embarrassing. Merlin smiled and said, but the king has already commanded you to return to your female body, hasn't he? Artoria's head drooped down as she looked a little downcast. Having been raised as a male for 15 years, she didn't know what emotions she was experiencing after being asked by Shirou to return to her female persona. However, the discomfort she felt was real. Observing Artoria's low mood, Shirou didn't try to console her. Instead, he pulled Merlin by the shoulder and dragged him to a corner, whispering, Merlin, let me ask you one last time. You're not playing me, are you? Why do you always think I'm playing you? Merlin asked in confusion. Am I the type of person to do that? Because you don't come across as a trustworthy person. Merlin, ... double quotes are. Come on, everyone else believes me. Why don't you believe me? Merlin asked, looking puzzled. Shirou thought to himself, because I know you're a scammer. Just like those on the internet, you have to trust me. After defeating Vortigern, you will definitely find a way to go back, Merlin said with a serious expression. You'd better not have lied to me, or I might lose my temper and become consumed by rage, Shirou replied with equal seriousness. I haven't lost my temper yet, so I don't even know what I'll do when I do. You better brace yourself for the consequences. Stop worrying about that and focus on defeating Vortigern. I don't need to think about that at all, Shirou replied. As long as it's standing in my way to get back home, whether it's a white dragon or a god, I'll do whatever it takes to kill it. Merlin broke out in a cold sweat and forced a laugh. Wow, ... You have great spirit, Guinevere. Kay suddenly burst in, looking flustered. Shirou turned his head and looked at him, surprised. What's wrong, Kay? You look flustered. My dad told me to keep an eye on you and not let you go out. Why? He frowned, feeling puzzled. The knights have surrounded this place, Kay said helplessly, his expression grim. What are they trying to achieve by surrounding this place? Artoria interjected before Kay could answer. Those knights are probably displeased with my king for pulling the sword. Shirou turned his head and looked at Artoria in surprise. She asked in confusion, What's wrong, my king? Did I say something wrong? He shook his head. No, nothing's wrong. It's just a bit strange to hear that from you. Why is that? Her slender eyebrows furrowed, somewhat displeased. My king, even though I may be foolish and only an inexperienced apprentice knight, I'm not stupid. People can harbor malicious intentions, including knights who seek glory. You pulling the sword out of the stone disrupted their plans for ruling, so it's only natural that they would hold a grudge against you. You have to be careful. The insult to the knights ends here. Shirou's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the memory of Saber's reprimand during the Fourth Holy Grail War. As he looked at Artoria, who was now warning him to beware of the knights, he couldn't help but feel a sharp contrast between the two. He couldn't help but wonder what had turned the clumsy but not foolish girl in front of him into the king of knights who pursued glory. But he knew that now was not the time to dwell on it. He turned to the group and said, Let's go. We'll go out and see what those knights are up to. Kay frowned and expressed his concern. Are you sure you don't want to hide first? They look arrogant, like they want to eat us. Shirou laughed in response, undeterred as he stepped out the door. That's perfect. Kay furrowed his brows and turned to look at Shirou's back, perplexed. Didn't this guy make every excuse to avoid trouble before? Why is he suddenly so proactive? Merlin patted his shoulder reassuringly and replied with a smile, because he has seen the goal. Merlin then followed Shirou outside. So, does that mean we just have to walk through the rest of it? Kay murmured to himself. I really can't tell. Was Guinevere always this confident? Brother, the one chosen by Caliborn must be the ideal king, Artoria said seriously and then followed them out. Kay was stunned for a moment, then followed them with a complicated expression on his face. Shirou walked out of the door and headed towards the entrance of the estate. As he approached, his eyebrows raised in surprise when he saw the silver-armored knights surrounding the estate, with Hector leading the apprentice knights to stop them outside. Step aside. Give us the sword and the stone, shouted one of the silver-armored knights. This must be a mistake. How could the king's sword be pulled out by a villager from the countryside? This must be a trick, exclaimed another. Exactly, we're all knights. How can we submit to a person of unknown origin? Added a third, a king chosen by destiny. Such a thing could not possibly exist, protested a fourth knight. The knights roared and surged forward, their faces twisted with madness. They had been waiting for this day for too long, since King Uther and Merlin declared 10 years ago that anyone who pulled the sword in the stone could inherit the throne. They had been training their martial arts, either under pressure from their family elders or out of their own ambitions, eagerly anticipating this day. The knights held the king in high regard and were more than willing to place their trust in his hands to prove their valor. However, when someone like this nobody managed to extract the sword, they were filled with dissatisfaction. Not everyone was like Artoria, who had trained day and night for 15 years and was able to accept the idea of becoming someone else's knight just because it seemed like the right thing to do. It was unthinkable for them to accept the authority of a complete stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, sitting atop their heads and issuing commands. They might have been willing to accept someone like Gawain, the illustrious prince who was blessed by the sun, if he had managed to extract the sword. However, they could never concede to a nobody. This act of someone else taking the throne felt like a blot on their honor. Everyone, please calm down, please, Hector bellowed, desperately attempting to restore order. Attacking these knights was out of the question. Not only were they the kingdom's frontline defenders against Vortigern, but the intricate web of relationships between each knight was enough to bind his hands and feet. Do you see, these guys have gone completely insane. Kay spread his arms in a gesture of helplessness as he spoke to Shirou. That's why I advised you to hide. My brother is correct, my king. Artoria cast a brief glance at the knights before addressing Shirou. Their jealousy has clouded their judgment, but they have no real power to undermine your claim to the throne. As per the agreement made by Uther and acknowledged by the church and other kings, the one who draws the sword is the rightful king of Britain. You needn't pay heed to their protests. Simply await the arrival of Baldwin and the others, who will oversee the proceedings and crown you accordingly. Shirou turned around and met Artoria's gaze. What's wrong, my king? Did I say something that upset you? She asked, concerned. No, it's not that. I understand that I'm temporarily holding the throne in your absence, but when we're in private, could you call me by my name, Fujimaru Shirou, or even Guinevere? It feels more appropriate, Shirou explained, his discomfort evident. Although it was just a formality, it was still uncomfortable for him to hear her call him my king. How could that be? Wouldn't it violate the knight's code? She questioned in disbelief. I have pledged my loyalty to you, my king. It feels inappropriate to call you so informally. Okay, although she's still very young. She is indeed the same person as the one from the Fourth Holy Grail War. As he overheard the conversation, Merlin furrowed his brow and stroked his chin, realizing that the man's true name was Fujimaru Shirou. Despite the fact that it was not an ancient British, the language difference did not impede the great magus from pronouncing a foreign name. So, if I understand correctly, you're suggesting that I should disregard their criticism and simply bide my time until my coronation? Yes, she nodded, affirming his understanding. But I disagree, Shirou countered. A king who once conquered the world told me that a king must be more dazzling and majestic than anyone else. If one shies away from facing these minor obstacles, they are unworthy of the title king, let alone participating in the grand theater of conquerors. Artoria was stunned. While I have never been a king myself, I will do my best to demonstrate the culmination of my knowledge. If you're interested in learning the ways of a king, then watch closely. I inherited this grandeur from a conqueror king, he explained. Striding past the onlookers with a composed demeanor, despite their scrutinizing glances, the sword in the stone, bestowed upon Shirou by Artoria, was strapped to his waist. I explicitly asked Kay to stay away. Why did he come here? Hector wondered, looking at Shirou in astonishment. The knight's eyes were ablaze with greed as they watched Shirou approach with the sword in hand. Give us the sword. That sword doesn't belong to you, one shouted. You must have cheated to obtain it. They jeered, their eyes burning with desire. Upon stepping forward, Shirou found himself immediately surrounded by a cacophony of questioning, suspicion, and accusations, all infused with a strong sense of malice. The intense emotions swirling around him surged through his body, converting the negativity into magical energy and storing it within him. The knights continued to chatter, their words dripping with malice. Each new wave of hostility that washed over Shirou made him feel like a small boat adrift in a sea of negativity, one wave away from being engulfed and lost beneath the surface. Their criticisms were so harsh that even Kay, who was notorious for his foul mouth, couldn't bear to listen any longer. Artoria, clearly displeased, was about to step forward and rebuke the knights, but Merlin intervened and stopped her. What are you doing, Merlin? Merlin remained silent, simply lifting his hand and pointing at Shirou's profile. Artoria and Kay both followed his gaze, and their faces quickly paled in shock. The knight's words were so filled with malice that even bystanders like Artoria and Kay found them difficult to bear. They felt their own anger burning within their hearts. It was hard to imagine how furious Shirou, who was directly involved in the conflict, must be feeling. However, despite the deluge of malicious words, Shirou's expression remained stoic, seemingly unmoved by the insults. To an outsider, it appeared as if the hateful words were nothing more than insignificant pebbles against towering mountains. But in reality, Shirou could feel the sting of the mocking, questioning, and suspicious words infused with malice. Despite this, he was determined not to let these words bring him down. Having accepted all the world's evil, he knew that the words of the knights were not even worth a single drop of rain. The knights' shouting continued to grow louder, creating a chaotic and discordant cacophony. When the noise reached its peak, Shirou raised Caliburn high and swung it down to the ground. Mana burst bang. With a powerful burst of mana, Shirou's physical strength surged, and in a mere instant, the ground cracked like a spiderweb, the resulting sound akin to a thunderous explosion. In that moment, his power was like that of a divine hammer, swiftly subduing the paper tigers with their malicious intentions. As Shirou gazed upon the knights, he recalled the grandeur of Iskander's commanding presence. A smile spread across his face as he exclaimed loudly, "Knights, if you harbor doubts or suspicions, it is only natural. I will willingly accept them all. Yet let it be known that I am the destined king of Britain, and this very sword I bear stands as an irrefutable testament to my rightful claim to the throne." Shirou lifted Caliburn high, but no one responded. The group stared at him with contempt, and an uncomfortable silence hung in the air. Despite this, Shirou's smile remained unwavering. One of the knights spoke up, questioning what makes you believe that you're the destined king. That's right, another chimed in. Just because you managed to pull the sword out, why should we believe you? You only managed to pull the sword out during our competition, a third knight added. Who's to say that you didn't do something to it beforehand? How can you prove that this sword is truly the proof of your rightful kingship? The fourth asked. The knights' questioning voices came one after another like waves. However, Shirou simply smiled in the face of their skepticism and asked boldly, "Then, how would you have me prove that I am the rightful king of Britain?" The knights responded, "Put the sword back and pull it out again in front of us." Shirou laughed and shook his head. "There's no need for all that trouble." He confidently grasped Caliborn, raising it high as he shouted, "Listen, everyone, I am the Red Dragon of Britain, Arthur. The proof of my rightful kingship, the conflict of heaven and earth, resides within this very sword." As magical energy poured into the blade like a sea, it suddenly lit up like a star, illuminating the surrounding. Shirou then swung the sword with great force, causing an explosion of blinding light and deafening sound that shattered the earth and tore apart the sky. Whoosh, boom. When the light finally dissipated, a massive sword mark in the shape of a dragon remained on the land, leaving the knights in stunned disbelief. Shirou smiled confidently and asked, "Do you still doubt my claim to the throne?" A heavy silence fell over the group as they realized that all their doubts and questioning had been thoroughly crushed with a single swing of the sword. Artoria murmured to herself, "Is this the grandeur that a true king should possess?" The knights were left stunned and unable to recover their senses for some time after Shirou's impressive display. They were left speechless, their eyes fixed on Shirou's smiling face as the situation was brought under his control. "I see that none of you have any objections," Shirou stated, sheathing Caliburn as he looked out at the assembled knights. "I understand why you have questioned and doubted me. It is not out of self-interest, but rather because you fear for Arthur, who was planted as a pawn by the vile Dragon King Vortigern. You are concerned for the stability of the kingdom and the welfare of its people, and this is a matter of public interest." The knights quickly snapped out of their daze and began to affirm Shirou's words one after another. "That's exactly what we fear," one of them said. "Your reputation is not well known, and your origins are unclear," another added. "We were genuinely afraid that you might be working for Vortigern. We may have been rude, but it was because we were anxious about the future of the kingdom." "That's right," a knight exclaimed. "Vortigern is a sly and cunning foe. We, on the other hand, are honest and upright people and must remain vigilant. If we have offended you, please forgive us." Another knight added, "Your impressive display and your ability to unleash the true power of the Caliborn is all the proof we need of your worthiness as a king. There is no need for further discussion." Shirou gave the knights a way out, and they eagerly took it, beginning to boast and flatter one another. It is human nature to both belittle and flatter others in the hope of feeling superior, while also bowing down before those in positions of authority. As for those with real ambition or those who are dissatisfied, they had to temporarily suppress their true thoughts in the face of this social dynamic. In addition, Shirou's earlier display had been truly astounding, leaving a lasting impression on all who witnessed it. Shirou smiled and spoke warmly. "I understand that each of you is a knight who has been bestowed with great honor, and that your previous behavior was motivated only by a desire for the greater good. You have all made significant sacrifices in the name of righteousness. For this I am not only deeply grateful, but I also deeply admire your noble hearts." Upon hearing Shirou's words, the previously shameless knights suddenly found an excuse to justify their behavior and began to loudly exclaim, "That's right, the king understands our hearts." The knights who felt ashamed began to blush and remained silent. Meanwhile, those with ambition or dissatisfaction could only conceal their true thoughts as they watched the shameless knights being led to shout, "Long live the king!" Shirou nodded slightly and then pulled out the Caliborn, raising it high and proclaiming loudly, "Listen to me, all of you." Even the previously shameless knights fell silent and turned their attention to him. Shirou spoke with great conviction. "My name is Arthur, son of Uther Pendragon. I am the embodiment of the Red Dragon, the destined king born to defeat the White Dragon Vortigern. If you are willing to entrust your swords to me, I will share with you the ultimate glory. When the Red Dragon spreads its wings, the land where this sword strikes shall be my kingdom." Shirou's passionate and stirring words moved the knights, who responded with loud cheers, shouting in unison, "Arthur, Arthur, 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 Arthur." To the knights, there was nothing more captivating than the prospect of unification and the attainment of ultimate glory. The power that Shirou displayed with Caliborn left no doubt as to his rightful claim to the throne, as it was a more compelling proof of kingship than mere bloodlines. The knights had no reason to doubt the words spoken by Arthur, as anyone who could gain the acknowledgement of Caliburn was undoubtedly the king bestowed with glory and honor. How could someone like that be capable of deception? As the son of the late King Uther, Arthur carried the blood of kings and was believed to be the incarnation of the Red Dragon. With the proof of Caliborn, his noble bloodline, his blueprint of glory, and his majestic charisma. There was nothing that could prevent Arthur from being accepted as the King of Camelot, or even the King of all Britain. Arthur, 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 Arthur. The knights cheered in unison, surrounding their newly crowned king. At this moment, Shirou became the center of everyone's attention, more dazzling than anyone else. Even Artoria found herself unable to take her eyes off him. The enthusiastic backing of the crowds imbued their expressions with a fervent hope and zeal, embodying the very essence of the ideal king that Artoria had always imagined. Kay's heart felt complicated and he wasn't sure how to react, but Shirou's charisma had just moved him in a way he couldn't ignore. At first he had been worried when he saw the knights approaching them with hostility, but in the blink of an eye, Shirou had managed to win them over, rallying their support with his impassioned words. Kay was deeply moved by the power and emotion behind Shirou's words, which were truly stirring. When the red dragon spreads its wings, the land where this sword strikes shall be my kingdom. Kay's heart was itching to hear more from Shirou. At that moment he couldn't help but acknowledge that perhaps Shirou was more suited to be the king than Artoria was, at least for the time being. As the knights continued to cheer loudly, the siblings silently gave their approval in their hearts. Meanwhile, both Merlin and Hector couldn't help but curse inwardly. How dirty! Hector, having walked many paths, was not easily fooled, and Merlin, as one of the top-ranked magus, was a great con artist. Together, they could easily see through Shirou's tactics. Despite the loud cheers from the knights, the two of them couldn't help but inwardly curse at the situation. How dirty! First, he had planted seeds of doubt in the knights, pushing them to the brink of disbelief. Then, he had used Caliburn to shock them further. After that, he had given them a way out, allowing them to feel more positively about the situation before revealing Arthur's true identity. Finally, he had used King Uther to persuade them to accept the truth. To cap it all off, Shirou had drawn an imaginary pie to further manipulate the knights' emotions and successfully guide them to support him. It was a masterful yet underhanded performance that left Merlin and Hector feeling amazed. It was a display of cunning and manipulation befitting a king. Hector looked at Shirou's back with a complicated expression. The so-called king must be more dazzling than anyone, more charismatic than anyone, more cunning than anyone, dirtier than anyone, and wiser than anyone. Without these qualities, how could a king hope to lead his people, earn the love and respect of his soldiers, and stand up against the machinations of ambitious, underhanded individuals? Initially, Hector had regarded Shirou as nothing more than a wise sage, but now, as he gazed upon him, he realized that Shirou was truly befitting of the title of king. Hector let out a sigh. Merlin's decision was not mistaken. Shirou is much more suited for the role of king than Artoria ever was. As Artoria's foster father and mentor, Hector knew her all too well. While she was a formidable warrior, she was also too rigid and upright. In the event of a foreign invasion, such a king would be an excellent choice, as both the nobles and ambitious individuals would be forced to restrain themselves. However, once the threat had passed, a king like her would find themselves with little ground to stand on. This is because Artoria was not cunning or ruthless enough to maintain control over her subordinates. Shirou, on the other hand, had fully demonstrated the cunning and ruthlessness that was necessary for a successful king. And perhaps most importantly, he possessed exceptional oratory skills that set him apart from others. Although Hector may not have realized it yet, Merlin certainly had. After losing several verbal battles to Shirou, Merlin knew all too well that Shirou's most potent weapon was his mouth. That's right. Merlin was completely convinced that it was Shirou's way with words that set him apart. While Merlin himself had the power to compel the knights to submit through his illusions or abilities, Shirou could achieve the same through his natural charisma and powerful speeches. Unlike Merlin, Shirou did not need to spend time pondering his words, but instead spoke with effortless conviction. Even the enchanted Caliburn could be freed, and the knights could be subdued. Merlin knew he could never replicate Shirou's unique gift for oration. That was the crucial difference between them. Morgan blended in with the crowd, gazing at Shirou, who had become the center of attention, with a rapt expression. "Is that truly my brother, Arthur?" she whispered to herself in amazement. "He's truly living up to our family's name. He's simply dazzling." Wait a minute. Morgan regained her senses, but confusion flickered in her eyes as she touched her chin. But why is his hair black? It's different from the bloodline of our House of Pendragon. Perhaps it's because of the influence of his mother's bloodline. Morgan lowered her head, lost in thought.